Hey, welcome back. So we've done the thing in the previous video where we managed to read using the start date, but not the end date. Okay. So let's make sure things are good here. Wait a minute. There's a function I was meaning to use here, but I can't seem to. Let's go to models. Okay, so I don't have a time function here yet. I'm used to the projects that I do where I have previous code that I was using which already works, and at some because I code so much, certain times I even forget the functions that I made in the past, how they really work. I just know that they work, so I just copy and paste them back. But in any case, there's something I was looking for here. Let's see if there's a date difference function. Oh, so there is. Let me see what that does. I want to see what error will come up when I do that. Okay, so it tells me argument count error diff expects at least 2 arguments, 0 given. Okay, so that's cool. So it expects 2 arguments. Okay, so let's put a start date and an end date. Let's put here end date. I want to see if this I want to be able to know when one date is bigger than the other. Okay, must be of type date time interface. Oh, okay. So this means I should invoke the date class and all that. So no, we're not going to use that. It makes things a bit complicated. So what we'll do is this instead. So we already know that it works for the start date. We just need to use it for the end date so that it's between one date and another. Right. So what we will do is I put all this in a bracket, this first if statement, so that I can do instead of equal to, I can put a greater than. Okay, greater or equal. Okay, greater or equal and greater or equal. Okay, so that it can show us any date from that point onward. So let's see if that actually works. Let's zoom out. So it does work because now we see from the 17th to the 28th, right? So it's working. The only thing is we have to limit it, otherwise it will go all the way to the current date. So what I'll do is I'll copy all of this and paste it here, and then we're going to put an and here now, like that, and paste this other stuff. Though we'll change the st for these guys, I'll do that. I'll select that and change that to end, because that's the variable that contains the end year, end month, and so on. And then we'll say less than or equal to, less than or equal to, and less than or equal to. So what we've done essentially is select a date between the first date and the last date. So looks like a complex query, but I've done it this way because it's easier to construct. These are building blocks for constructing any type of query that you'd want to do pertaining dates. Okay, so that's why I've reduced it like that. There are other keywords you can use, like between this date and that date, but they get I think this is easier for learning. We may do it differently another time. Okay, so let me refresh. So there's 3 up to, so let me see if I can exclude 28 March by selecting the proper, let's go to 27th March and let me search, and as you can see it's gone. So this is working as well. But what if I select a smaller date on this one, right? Let's go to January on the last part. So this date is the start date, but it's ahead and the end date is smaller. So this doesn't logically make any sense. So let me do go. So I don't get an error, instead I get no results, which is right. So maybe it's okay. We don't need to check whether this date is bigger than the other. It's up to the user to use their common sense. For as long as we don't get any errors, I think it's okay. All right, so that does it for the data that comes back. Now the issue is, let's say for example, I don't have this date. I just want to retrieve data for a very specific date, like on the 17th. So what I'll do here is I'll put another if statement. So we leave this as it is because we've changed the query here quite nicely. But before we get to this point, let me do this. If both start and end are set, okay, so we're going to run that. But let me duplicate this and say if only start date is set. Okay, so if only the start date is set, let's do something else. So here I'm going to say if start date and not end date. So if you don't want this to be checked while this, because only one of these can run, so instead of having it to check on both, we'll just put an else there. That way it will do, once one is true, it doesn't bother with the other. Okay, so there we go. So when the start date is the only thing that's set, I will remove the end date parameters because I don't need them. And of course I will remove them from the query. So they start right here where there's an and let's delete all the way up to where it starts with order. But then since we are not doing a greater than, or we want a very specific date, so we'll do equal sign. Let's remove the greater than or less than signs here. Oopsie daisy. Okay, there we go. Pretty cool. And that's it. So now if I come back to this, while you see here it didn't work very well, this time it will if I hit go. So you see it gets a very specific date, and if I go next month on the 28th and go, I get very specific date. Now you can improve this by adding because right now if I, let's see here, if I say 17th for example, I think it was 17th of last month. Okay, there we go. So there are several pages. Let's see if any of the other pages have anything, and it doesn't seem like they do. Now they would if there were enough records, I guess. Let me cancel that and keep going. Let's see what other dates. There's 11th and 17th, etc, etc. So if I say 11th previous month, let's start with 10th maybe, and then let's do this month up to the 30th and go. So this is what I get. It can still take me to the next page, can it? Apparently not. Can it now? Let's see. Page 2. So why isn't it working? Okay, maybe there's just not enough records. That's why, I guess. Because it should work. If I go to page 2, I should see some records because the start is set and the end is still set even on page 2. So it should work still. But let me close all these and see if there's anything on page 2. Okay, so there isn't anything on page 2. All right. So everything works. Now what I was saying is, to improve this, you might want to add a limit, how much to edit the limit of records here. Let's say you read records for the whole month and you want to see all of them in this list, and maybe there are 100 in that list. Currently I think we have a limit of 24 or something, so you can change that right here with the drop down. But at least you get the general idea here. And so let's try and do the same thing for the graph view. Also, what you might want to do is, depending on what you're reading here, you may want to see a total of what has been selected, because that might be an interest of the one who's trying to edit records here or something. So here it only shows today's total, it's fixed on that, but we can make it in such a way that if any of these are set, maybe just the start date by itself is set, that should be enough to prompt us to show the total of what was retrieved instead of today's total. So let's do that real quickly before we go anywhere. So far the sales total comes from ST, which is this query there. There's a second query there, you can see, and there's a summation of total right there, right? So what we might do instead, because this really wait a minute, interesting. Okay, what I would do is, let me write the query here as because this is query, that's query, so it's overriding the same query. So what I would do here is I'll put this as query total. I'll do this. What's that? Total, yes, like this. Okay. I'm not sure what I was trying to do here, but let me move the query. Oh, I can't, can I? Oh, so I was doing this here. Interesting. Okay, what I'll do is I'll move this query above. So let me cut this. I want to move it above here so that it's created right next to this one. And then I'm going to just copy all of this, query total. Actually, I don't need to. I just need to know that it's sum total as total. That's it. So let me copy that. Now what will happen is that the query is created here, query total, but it won't be replaced until it gets to this, until it's run there. But I want to manipulate it in between if there are any of these params are true. I don't want to add new if statements here. So all I'm going to do is create a second query here. Oopsie. Duplicate that and call this one query total. So if it goes here, then query total will change to this. So it's the same query essentially. The only thing I'll change is instead of the star, I'll put sum total as total. That's it. So that it gets the total value of the total column from whatever records it has read on the other side. So let's do the same here. Let me paste that and then let me do underneath total like that. Okay. So now what will happen is, normally you see today's total is 0, but if I add February 10th, just those records from that day, and hit go. Oh, I should see something else. Why is it empty anyway? Oh, it's 10th. It should be 11th. And I wanted to do it in between. And as you can see, these records that have been returned have a total this time. So if I do a in between from March to March 30th and hit go, you see the number increases because it's looking at a bigger total here. But that's what it does now. It shows you the new total based on those. Now you may want to change this selected total is equal to instead of today's total. Let's add a numpad here very quickly. Okay. Our limit comes from here. There's a number here, 20. But instead of just having a number here, what we can do is put an if statement. We're going to say if it exists in the get, let's use that. Okay. So limit get will be, we'll call it limit, and then put a question mark, double question mark like this. If this isn't set for some reason, then let's just give it a default value of 20. Now it's very possible that somebody in the URL will type some letters instead of numbers, so we must make sure that limit is always an integer. So I'm going to say limit is equal to, and say int like this. Let's put that in brackets, int, and then limit like that. So we're casting it as an int no matter what it is. It could be text, it will still be sent as a integer there, right? And then there's also a possibility that limit will be less than 0. So let's do another check right here and do this and say if limit is less than 1, which makes it 0 or something. If limit is less than 1, let's put a question mark. Let's set it to 10 as a default. But if everything is good, it's not, let's set it back to whatever value limit contains already. So this is all just sanitization to protect our database, to make sure we don't supply text and then we don't put a limit of -1, which doesn't really make any sense. Okay, so there we are, we have that. So all we need to do is give the limit inside the URL, and then we'll influence how many of these, what happens down here. So I'm going to go to views here and let's go admin, sales view, right? The view itself. So there's table view, graph view. I'm looking for the start end date. This is the end date. So I want to add one more column here like this. So there are 3 columns. Let me check that out. Okay, so there are 3 now, but this one, instead of being end date, will be rows. Okay, so you can choose how many rows you want in there. So the value is going to be, okay, so instead of end, it's going to be called a limit. So let me change all references down here for end to limit. So let's do limit right there. Okay. And then the type of control is not date, it's going to be number. You can also put a minimum here and say minimum is equal to 1. Okay, but somebody can always alter this and change it and stuff, so it's a good thing we have that mechanism at the top here that prevents us from getting flawed data. So that's okay, and let's see what that does. Let me refresh. Okay, so rows here. I wonder why it is changed. So what I can do for the button here is, where is the button? Where is the button? This one. So I can do a style and just limit max width, or just put width, you know, 20 pixels. Let's see if that oh, so 20 pixels is that big. Let's put 10 pixels, shall we? Wow, doesn't seem to be phased at all. Maybe let's try max width, right? Maximum width. There we go. Now that's some discipline right there. Okay, let's put it at 20. Okay. Oopsie. 20 is that small. Wow. Maybe 50 then. Yeah, I just want it like a slither. Same thing here, I can do this rows, and also rows needs a default value. There's value here which says empty. Here, instead of an empty, we can put 10 as actually the limit. The base is 20, so that becomes the basic value. And then here I will put a style and then say max widths and put I don't know, 80 pixels maybe. Let me remove this bracket here. Let's see that. Okay, much better. Okay, so and that solves the problem right there. So if I now say go, oh, so that won't work. Let's do it again. Let's say I want to see only 4. Oopsie. I want to put only 4 records, right? But I'm going to get from February 10th to March 30th, but just 4 records, so go. And as you can see, there are 1, 2, 3, 4 records, so it's working now. And that's the amount that is there. Or is it? Wait a minute. Can that be true? 40, 60, that's 100, 20, 20, that's 40. This is a flawed total here because this isn't right, is it? It can't be that much. So why is the total flawed? The total is more than the limit. So maybe there's no limit on the total itself. There is. What is going on? I do not know. Interesting. Let's see if I go to 21. Yeah, I see the total does not change at all. It's completely unfazed. Go. Okay, at least we have one thing going here, but we were doing all this for the sake of the total. So total sales is equal to 0, st total, blah, is total from sales, where this is interesting. Why? I have no idea. I'll go through it and see why it's not cooperating that well. But at least the query count is working as planned, because if I do that, I can reduce it like that, as you can see. I just want the total to match what I'm seeing here. That would be better.